Hey there guys, you're here with Bo Stoner and Adam Stokes on the Stokesy and Stoner Show, episode number 13. Thank you for tuning in, and tonight we are going to be talking about just a couple of issues, similar to what we did last episode. We're going to take a look at the markets, and then we're going to do like a deep dive, open chat into some interesting topics. I had fun with it last episode, want to do it again. The thing I'm going to talk about tonight is using blockchains for logistics. What do I mean by that? What do I mean? I essentially mean materials handling, tracking of goods through the supply chain for national and international users. Why blockchain has a huge value proposition here, how cryptocurrencies and decentralization fits into this value proposition, and why it's actually a requirement for a system like this to add value in the long term. Adam, over to you for what you've got coming for us on tonight's show.
I look forward to putting in my 2 Satoshis on that topic as well, as how it can actually save lives. And I've got a few case studies for that. But I'll be talking more about freedom. That is what I've learned a lot from watching the hearings of Facebook, the Libra project, and how it can relate to freedom and what is freedom and how crypto can contribute to it. And of course, we'll be adding in at the end our coin picks.
So guys, thank you for tuning in. Stick around and let's get started. Welcome back to the video, everyone. Thank you for tuning in and kicking off the episode, as always, taking a look at the overall markets. Now, it's been a pretty stagnant week. Last week we had similar kind of metrics, but we've actually taken some more losses. When we look at the 7-day charts, although I'm going to let Adam go through this in detail, we can see that most of the market is down. As we know, there are strong correlations to whatever Bitcoin does, Bitcoin being the market leader. Things kind of follow Bitcoin up and down in this roller coaster. Some of the people hanging off the roller coaster might, be off to one side, and others are directly behind Bitcoin on this roller coaster, following it exactly on what moves it does. But overall, nothing too exciting. I mean, it's generally not fun talking about the markets when it's a sea of red. I mean, some people may see it as opportunity, and in some regards they are right. But overall, we've had most coins in the red. We've actually got Crypto.com chain. Crypto.com is sponsors of my channel. Really, really great bunch of people behind this project. That is up 32.7%, which is amazing. And actually, I've seen very strong gains from both of their native tokens really over the past 2 months. They have both the MCO and the CRO token. A little bit of gains on this thing called V Systems. Never heard of it, 0.5%. 13.3% on Hedge Trade, never heard of that either. We've got Lisk up 6.3%, still sitting at 41 in the top 40, sorry, but overall, not a huge amount of action in the positive. Adam, over to you, my friend.
Yeah, not looking too good out there. Over the last 7 days, Bitcoin down 6.67%, up, down, but I think we've got another sideways wedge forming. And I actually watched a video from Richard Hart. He's been offline for a while, but he's coming back in, and he has, of course, the Hex project that he's speaking about. But he's mentioned the potential of an $8,500 bottom. In the big picture, I'm not really too focused on these predictions in the short and medium term. I'm in this for the long haul, but we can see going further down the list, Ethereum also down 6.78% over the last 7 days, and Litecoin in the position 4, coming up as one of the only greens that we can see out there at 2.1%. Well, we know the halving is coming up, and I think the markets are reflecting that halving that is inbound. Bitcoin Cash down 1.8.5%, but Binance Coin looking strong, up another 6%. This thing just keeps climbing. It's currently sitting at nearly $30 American. And dare we say, Bo, Bitcoin SV up 33%, still holding its position at number 9 with Stellar in there at number 10 after it flipped with Tron, both sitting at low single or below single digit reds. But just quickly over to the biggest movers. I'm looking at a different site here at coinlib.io. The biggest movers in the last 7 days is in fact number 1, ranked at position 186, Salt Lending. moving up 137.3% in the last 7 days. That's our biggest mover in the crypto charts, and our biggest loser in the cryptos charts over the last 7 days is coin at number 77. I haven't heard of this coin. It's called ABBC, and ABBC has dropped 36.49% over the last 7 days. As you said, Bo, it's not too exciting when we get into red, but this is crypto. This is how it rolls. It can't always go up, and it creates great opportunity, as all investors will say, when there is blood on the streets, although we're not giving financial advice, but when there is blood on the streets, potentially the time to buy. You don't typically want to buy when everything's right at the top, because we saw what happened at the end of 2017. It can hurt. Bo, I want to talk about something very important that's happened in the last week. History is being made. Top Gun 2 is coming out next year. I'm excited. I can't wait.
Yeah, and I'm interested in hearing your take on this more, Adam, given you served in the Air Force and you would have much more of a, I'm sure, an attachment to this movie than me. But this latest movie looks, I got to say, absolutely sick. Like the trailer is so damn cool. It gave me goosebumps, and I've watched it probably 6 times. I've gotten all my friends to come and watch this movie, and like just the tone and the energy of this is just like, oh, you know what I mean? It gives you that feeling like you're on Froth Town to Froth City, and I don't know, words can't express. And I must say too, I was actually watching an interview with Tom Cruise. My hat off to this guy, right? For this movie, he only wanted actors that could sustain 8 Gs in these fighters. They filmed every scene in real Super Hornets. They had specialized camera equipment made to fit into the cockpits of these planes. He didn't want anyone that couldn't handle 8 Gs. No special effects. It's all being filmed in cockpit. And he himself is a pilot, and he himself did a lot of flying, probably in the passenger seat. I don't imagine he would actually be flying. I don't think it'd be legal for a civilian to fly these planes, right? You would have more info on that.
Oh, mate. Yeah, you can actually see it. As you said, it's quite emotional. This is, I think, 32 years in the making, and
wow,
it is the whole reason why I joined the Air Force when I was a boy. I watched that movie over and over and over again, to the point that my siblings put a lot of crap on me and teased me, and then I went into closet watching this videotape, if you remember VHS tapes, until it was broken. And then even when it came on TV, I watched it. And of course, Top Gun is based on, it's actually the Navy, although they're planes, but America has such a huge defense force. They have 4 services: Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, and each one of those services has a flying capability.
Well, Adam, correct me if I'm wrong. Was it the Navy that actually had aircraft to begin with, which then splintered off to become the Air Force, or was it the Army that originally?
It was actually the Army. Good question.
Army, right?
Yeah. So the history of it is, and here's a bit of random history. Air Force, the Australian first Air Force was the RAF, the Royal Air Force, Britain. The second oldest Air Force in Australia, in the world, is Australia, the Royal Australian Air Force.
Is that right?
Yeah, the official second oldest Air Force is the Royal Australian Air Force. But that's not to say America didn't have flying capability. They just had aircraft in the Army, and it wasn't until big generals, flying generals, said, hey, we actually need to have a standalone service called the Air Force. Because remember, it's the youngest service, because planes are the newest technology. And then once that was established, people at the same time were saying, hey, look at the capability of being able to launch aircraft off ships. Because in war, or security, let's say security, you have a thing called force projection. And force projection is what really makes countries, nations powerful. So part of the reason why America is so powerful, it's not just because it has a big defense force and lots of money. It's all about force projection. And the epitome of force projection is an aircraft carrier. You might say, well, you've got ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, which are missiles that can fly from one continent to another, but they're not. Yes, of course, that's force projection, but it's kind of on or off. When you're sending a missile from continent to continent and it lands in another continent, you're causing mass destruction. Whether it's a nuclear warhead or a traditional warhead, you're asking for trouble. In fact, even if it's just a piece of metal falling out of the sky, you're asking for trouble. But when you have an aircraft carrier, and typically one of America's aircraft carriers, and think about this, Bo, one of America's aircraft carriers, their Navy carriers, has more air power, arguably, than the entire Royal Australian Air Force. Now, we've got a great Air Force in Australia, but to give you an idea of the contrast between the power of one of these aircraft carriers. Now, I think they've got, from memory, 14 aircraft carriers, and each one is different size. Some are nuclear powered, some are a bit older, some are catapulted, some are not catapulted. But essentially, one of their bigger aircraft carriers has more firepower or air power than the entire Australian Air Force when we're talking about lead-in fighters and strike fighters. Now,
it's true. It's
now this is
truly
just their Navy. That's one ship in one Navy. Then you've got their Marines, which also has a flying capability, Harrier jump jets and other aircraft that they're bringing in. And you haven't even spoken about their Air Force yet. Then you bring in their actual Air Force, and you have unforeseeable amounts of power. Now, we can link this into crypto, because to run these things, it takes a lot of money. And to make a lot of money, you have a thing called the Federal Reserve. And there's this relationship between the amount of money you can create to build these massive militaries, and of course, the highly technically skilled and capable human manpower to actually fly these things and run these things. But going back to the Top Gun video, which was a bit of a digression there, is that Top Gun... that movie changed my life and got me into service, and sent me down that path for many years. And when I watched this, finally, after 32 years, it made me think of when I lived in America. When movies came out in America, any movie, you go to the movies, and the Americans were great. They would actually dress up in the costume, if you will, of whatever they were watching. So you might see it sometimes with kids. Harry Potter comes out, the kids go to the movies and they're all wearing Harry Potter outfits. But for grown-ups in America, it's not uncommon to see grown-ups, like Star Wars is probably the best example. A Star Wars movie comes out, people go dressed as the Star Wars characters. I, my friend, am thinking about going to Top Gun 2 next year wearing a flying suit.
well,
you look like a complete wanker, but
you absolutely should, and that is actually a good segue into a question that I have for you regarding this trailer. But before we do that, I just want to touch on what you were saying before about the US military might. Now, I know this is a bit of a digression, but there's something I've been researching lately about the US Navy back in the 1950s. So there was something called Project RAND, which was an acronym for Research and Development. And Project RAND was funding essentially pushing technological capabilities for different warfare systems. Specifically, some of the systems they were looking at were anti-missile missiles. And one of the missiles they had, this was in the late 1950s, they developed this, was called the Nike Zeus. Now, I don't know how much you know about the Nike Zeus, but this was an anti-missile missile system that was deployed, I believe, in 1957 and 1960. This missile system was so incredibly advanced that they had around, I think, seven different radars that were all linked to a central computer. So they would deploy this system on a site, let's say about 1 to 1.5 square miles. These different dishes, one would look at the trajectory of the incoming projectile, one would analyze its speed, one would look at the trajectory and compute the where the target would be in a certain amount of time. All the data will get sent back to the computer. Now this missile would go 12,500 kilometers an hour. This was in the 50s, in the late 50s, and there is footage of this system. There's footage of this system being deployed. It was highly successful. After about 5 tests, they were running tests on Kwajalein Island, down towards South America or in the Caribbean. And how advanced some of these projects were, little do people know in the current day and age just how unbelievably advanced the US military might was 6 decades ago. It is staggering. It is staggering when you look at history to see some of these systems, and this is the stuff that's been declassified. I mean, I'm sure there are technologies that are still classified that would truly blow the socks off. But what I want to ask you is, before we move on, is in the new Top Gun flick. There's a few frames of Mr. Cruise in a spacesuit. Now, what is your interpretation? Do you think he is getting into a U2, or do you think he's getting into some maybe some kind of classified craft? What do you think?
I know exactly what you're talking about, and it struck me as well. So it no longer flies now, but the SR-71A Blackbird was and still is in history, but it no longer flies, the fastest manned aircraft ever to fly, and that was going more than 3 times the speed of sound. Now, here's a story from Uncle Adam. When I was in the Middle East, I actually met a U-2 pilot. So I can't go into too much details, but I was on a certain base somewhere, and I was actually filling up my vehicle, and a car rocked up, and in this car, so imagine you're at a big military base, middle of the desert. I'm filling up my everyday runner, a military vehicle that I'm running around on the base, and a Commodore. So I'm in the Middle East, and this hotted up Commodore rocks up on base to fill up, and it's got lights on the roof. And out of this car gets a pilot in a flight suit. And I'm a minority on this base, as in it's an American base, and I'm an Aussie. And I said to this pilot, I said, hey, mate, because we're the same rank. I said, that's an Australian Commodore, and it had the Chevrolet badge on it. And he goes, "Oh yeah, mate, all you Australians see that." And I said, "What's the go? Why have you got this performance car?" Because it was like, it wasn't just a standard Commodore. It was like I'm not a Commodore guy, I'm a Beamer guy, but it was basically I don't know, like a GTS or something, like the top of the line Holden Commodore wearing a Chevy badge in the Middle East. And I said, "What's the go?" And he goes, "Oh, this is a chase car." I said, "What does this mean?" And he's a U2 pilot, and I had this great conversation with him, and he was basically saying that when the U2 lands, it's such an old design, and this plane goes so high. The reason why they still use the U2 is it can fly above, is it the stratosphere? Forgive me, viewers. It's like out of this world. But he basically said he flies so high, and I said, "Oh, what? So you can see the curvature of the Earth?" And he said, "No, mate, that's nothing." He goes, "I fly so high that I see shooting stars under the aircraft." So think about seeing shooting stars in the sky. They fly so high that they see shooting stars under the aircraft. Now, this is all public knowledge, but I'm like, whoa. But anyway, when this aircraft lands, because the pilots don't have really good vision of the way it's set up, what actually happens is as the aircraft is landing on the ground, behind the aircraft, this Commodore, this HSV rocket ship, comes tearing onto the actual runway, and he talks the pilot down. And the person in the chase car is in fact a pilot themselves, because they speak the same language. They understand what the pilot's going through. And I'm like, no way. And he goes, "Yeah, do you want to do a run with me?" And I said to him, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Well, I can do practice runs. We can go out there." I'm like, hell yeah. So I jump into this American's car. We go out to the hard stand. Now, on bases, there are different levels of security, and you need different passes to get into different areas. And I had the right passes in the right areas. But basically, we went into a super, super secure area, which is the runway. And here I am in this car, and he got clearance from, and just before you go on the runway, you do a FOD check. So you go to all the tires to make sure there's no foreign object debris, so it's all clear. And just before we got onto the runway, he gets clearance from the tower. And it was really cool. He goes, I don't know, I'm just making up shit, but he was basically making up call signs here. It's like, Victor 23, this is 57, requesting permission to do a high-speed run down runway 40, entering entrance kilo. And it comes straight back from the tower like, "Yeah, you are clear to proceed." So he talks me through this thing. So imagine you've got a nice dead straight runway, and I thought he would start the run sitting on the runway at the end at the edge. But of course, you don't do that, because you need the runway clear for an aircraft, and you don't want to take it. If something goes wrong, you don't want a bloody car sitting in the end side of the runway. So what they actually do is he's standing on an entrance to the runway, and we go through a simulation of a U2 landing. This is a long answer to your question, by the way. But as this U2 is coming down, before it comes down, he floored this thing. Like, I understood why we use this car, because we went from 0 to 100 in a very short distance, and we're not even on the runway yet, Bo. And then as we get onto the runway, he hooks the car. Now, to all you Commodore lovers out there, you'll like this. We're going probably about 120 kilometers per hour by the time he hooks it left to curve onto the runway to simulate that. They time it quite well. Just as the aircraft is coming down, he's already doing like 80 to 100 k's an hour, and just as the aircraft goes past him, he then hooks onto the runway behind the aircraft. Now, of course, the aircraft is doing hundreds of kilometers an hour, so he's got to have a rolling start, and he's just absolutely flooring this thing. And we are tearing down this runway at over 200 kilometers an hour, and it was so noisy. I'm like, what's that noise? And it was actually the lights on the roof, and it made me think, if you're a cop in a high-speed chase, there's actually a lot of noise from the lights on your roof, just the wind noise, the wind turbulence. And it's also why I think lights are now a lot thinner, because when you're doing high speed or any speed, you've got this big bit of noise, air brake on your roof. Anyway, once we got down to the end of the runway, he sort of slowed down a little bit, but we still pulled off the runway at unforeseeable speeds. But as we're tearing down this runway, a military runway at over 200 kilometers an hour, he just simulated what he'd be doing and what he'd be talking to the pilot. So, to answer your question, pilots or aircrew who are wearing that suit, he's either, I think, and I don't know because I haven't seen the movie, but I have to see. I reckon he's wearing that suit because possibly a U2. I don't think so, because they certainly can't launch off aircraft carriers. There's no way. But they're probably putting him in some type of new, and I hope they don't ruin the movie with this, Bo. I hope they don't say this is some type of new spaceship that Tom Cruise is flying and he's teaching all these new crew to fly. I hope they don't do that. But essentially, when you're wearing that type of flight suit, it's when you're at super high altitude and doing stupid speeds. So there's your
Interesting.
answer. I wonder what it's going to be, but I am glad that he's not promoted. I'm glad he's been 32 years and he's still an O3, which is third level up officer, which is a junior officer. But he's maintained that position so he can be on the front line of flying fighter jets. And the reason why he's maintained that rank, in my opinion, is because the higher you go, the more desks you fly. So for aircrew, there's many aircrew who don't want to be promoted because they don't. Not because they don't necessarily want to command, but they just want to fly. And the higher you go, the less likely you are to fly. So you actually see in some of that footage, he's launching off these carriers. And if he's in a Super Hornet is a two-seater. But the footage shows that it looks like he's in the back seat, which is fair enough. He's launching off an aircraft in the back seat. But it's not unreasonable that if they're making a movie, they could put him in the front seat and have the actual pilot flying in the back seat, which you can do because that's what you do when you're training. When you're training, the flight instructor will sit in the back seat with the pilot student in the front seat. So you're saying he can actually fly, can he?
He is a pilot himself. Yes, he is a civilian
Same with
pilot.
John Travolta.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, John Travolta flies his big it's like an old Qantas plane, like a big old
Is that
Qantas
right?
plane. Yeah, but I've heard stories of him doing all these pre-flight checks. That he doesn't do it. So part of flying is you could do all these flight checks, these pre-flight checks that when I was flying with a certain squadron, I'm not aircrew by the way, but when I was flying with a certain squadron, you'd get out to the aircraft at least an hour before just to get the aircraft ready to fly it. And apparently, I don't know if this is true, but I've read it a couple of times, that John Travolta will get our pilot, to do all that boring pre-flight check stuff. And then just before takeoff, he'll jump in the pilot seat with the pilot who did the pre-flight checks sitting next to him, and he'll take off and then hand over. But hey, if it's your aircraft and you're that rich, you can do whatever the bloody hell you want.
Very true. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing the movie and finding out more about it, mate. I'm very much looking forward to it. Look, let's get into the first chat. Let's get into the first chat today, mate. And what I want to talk about, I've got this article here that's come out from CoinDesk. Ugandan president backs bid to tackle fake meds with blockchain. I'm not even going to get into the article. I just want to use it as the context for what I want to talk about, and that is logistics or materials handling supply chain on a blockchain. Now, the way the current system works, if I understand this correctly, because it is quite complex, when you have the point of supply, or you have where a good is manufactured, when it is sent from a certain location, there is a sign off between sender and recipient at every single point. You have generally pro forma documentation that is used between these points. So a courier may pick it up from a warehouse, they might drop it off at a dock. There is a sign off at the dock to say goods have been received. The receipt is generally passed back to the manufacturer, so they know at which point that essentially that transaction has occurred. Now, you may have different requirements for, say, military goods. Adam would know more about this. I would say there would be a more stringent process for that, because some of the goods may be weapons or other things. But even for medicines, you're also going to have, I would assume, more stringent process for that as well. But regardless, applying a general rule, at every single point of transport, you have a sign-off or receipt of delivery of those goods. Now, this is all done in paper, right? The goods are only the original sender and receiver of those goods is only notified of these goods once they arrive. There is virtually no tracking between those 2 points. So when you order a parcel from eBay, you get a tracking number, and you'll know that that tracking number only updates once those goods arrive at a certain warehouse or at a dock, and that's how you know those goods have been there. Now, that has been signed off by paper, right? Even if they're using a computer, it's still a very manual process. Now, this essentially logistics is highly prone to essentially, I'm trying to think of the right word here. It's ripe for corruption, right? So what they can essentially do is, they can be people along the supply chain can use this process to smuggle illicit goods, whether that's human trafficking, whether that is weapons, whether that is drugs. They can use this process to get goods into a country. On the flip side of that, when you're looking at just legitimate transport of, say, medical goods, this can also be prone to fake drugs. So you could have the authentic drugs could be taken and replaced with fake drugs, and there's essentially no way currently of transparently tracking these goods, but also having a process which that original good is signed off as being original. And here's where blockchain comes in. Here's where some really incredible innovations I believe are going to happen in this space, and how I think as a scenario this is going to go about. With a blockchain, as you know, every transaction that is written to the blockchain provides transparency to any stakeholder viewing the blockchain. Now, when information is hashed, whoever has the private key to a certain wallet, or whoever may be viewing these transactions, can see visibility of whatever transactions are occurring on that blockchain. So what you could have essentially is, you could have data that is hashed, or data that is written to the blockchain that is only accessible by recipients of that blockchain who control a private key or control essentially access to know what that hash data means. What do I mean by that? By certain people in the supply chain, let's just say it's a medical supply chain, right? Continuing on from this example, each either government or a pharmacy or the supplier would be the ones that can decipher the data occurring on the blockchain. If it's anyone else, they can still see that the transactions are being written. They just don't know exactly which drugs are the drugs that are being transported. Now, this is important because you don't want everyone having access to this kind of information. You don't want people who have ill intent having access to the information at a port who may wish to swap the drugs. The second exciting thing about this process, in addition to providing transparency and visibility and huge efficiencies, because every time the good is updated, the transaction is updated as being arrived at a certain location, is anyone viewing that data on the blockchain has live access to see that transaction occurring. No database has to be updated. No form has to be done by an administration officer. So you have huge efficiencies. Now, how exactly they would do this, you see projects like Walton Chain. have been looking at, and they have patented actually their own RFID chips to be used on the goods that would pass through a scanning device that would essentially scan the item. So these RFID chips are put on at the point of manufacture. They're like one-time use, similar to barcodes, one-time use. When they go through certain supply points, that is essentially a transaction that's written to the blockchain, and anyone monitoring the supply chain can see that that good has just arrived at that location. The only downside of that is you actually need to provide physical infrastructure in accordance with the RFID reading process to integrate into the overall system. But for goods, highly important goods, I would say defense, I would say the medical industry, pharmaceutical industry, sensitive items, high net worth items, transparent blockchain solutions for logistics, I think, are a huge capability. That's why a few companies are exploring it. And I see it as a tremendous benefit long term. And I think that's one real value use case. Now, just before I move on, I want to touch on how these systems need to be working in a distributed way. So we've just shown how this supply chain process could work by adding value in terms of transparency, efficiency, and reducing fraud and corruption in terms of those goods being compromised along the supply chain. What about the data? Where does this get stored? Because traditionally, these systems would use databases. Maybe they're uploaded to cloud-based systems such as Google G Suite or Google Drive services or Microsoft AWS. Different cloud-based systems. Now, with a blockchain, it has to be distributed. That's another part of the value proposition is no one person controls the data, so it can't be manipulated. It's written to, let's say, for example, 101 nodes or delegates. But how do you incentivize people to run a node unless the company developing the blockchain solution is specifically paying people to run a node, which is an option? On the flip side, you randomize the process and make it voluntary, and you reward people in a cryptocurrency. This is exactly how Bitcoin works. You reward people in a cryptocurrency for running a node. You don't know who the person is running a node. You don't care. It's a voluntary process. The monetary incentive for them is to receive a cryptocurrency in reward for their computational power they're adding if it's proof of work, but also their hard drive storage because they're actually storing the blockchain on their computer. They don't have access to the data any more than anyone does reading the blockchain. None of it means anything unless people have essentially the private key to the wallet or the smart contract that is deciphering the hash data. They don't need to worry about that. And you're incentivizing them with a cryptocurrency. And here's where cryptocurrency and blockchain, distributed blockchain systems, I think have tremendous value in certain applications. So that's it for me. That's my rant done.
Yeah, I think this is what's really important with the power of crypto. It's not just, of course, we can give money to each other anonymously through privacy coins or decentralized going away from the banks. The reality is that everything around crypto. So I say to people who are getting into the crypto space, they're like, "Oh, Bitcoin, Bitcoin." I say, look, the reality is that Bitcoin is an application of the blockchain, just as email is to the internet. Bitcoin is to the blockchain. That is, Bitcoin is merely an application on the blockchain. And as Internet 2.0 gets further out, we'll start to understand that, yes, Bitcoin is still powerful, just as email is powerful, but email isn't the internet and Bitcoin isn't blockchain. And I'm glad you raised this article with this topic, because this will save lives. And it will save lives not just in the drug or pharmaceutical industry, where we've got a big issue where babies are dying through faked baby formula. Now, it's actually a horrific story. So in China, you have a mother and father. They're trying to do the right thing by their baby, their child, their family, and they go out and they go to a supermarket. And the supermarket themselves might be legitimate. Everything might be legitimate, but somewhere in that supply chain, someone has said, "Oh, well, this really important ingredient that keeps babies alive, we're going to substitute it with plaster because it looks white and powdery, and babies were literally not were are literally dying. Now, this quality assurance at one extreme end is babies dying, then in the middle and probably at the same end, but older people dying from the wrong medications. But it goes all the way down to absolutely everything in the supply chain, including brand protection, Bo. So think about I've traveled a lot through Asia, and there's certain countries like, I don't know, Cambodia, Thailand, China, even South Korea, where you can go to markets and you can buy pretty much anything you want, as in brands like Louis Vuitton, Polo, anything at a really cheap price. And it's actually really good stuff. It actually, years ago when I was traveling when I was much younger, it was really crappy. But now, of course, technology and production is getting so much better. The These companies, now whether you like the companies or not, their brand was being diluted because of fake stuff. And my vision is, in the future, you'll have some type of QR code, and that QR code will show when you go to buy anything from a Louis Vuitton belt to baby formula powder to feed your child. You'll scan this code, and the blockchain you can't lie, it's immutable, and you can't tamper with it. So we'll be able to see as consumers, whether it's something as simple as a belt or as important as baby formula, the blockchain will save lives, it will protect brand names, and it will maintain value.
Actually, you just gave me an idea through that. You were onto it. One way they could do this, because I'm just thinking of different ways they could do it where they did it as transactions, but now we have digital assets. So what they could essentially do is they could have connected to their printing machine that prints out these QR codes, right? Because every digital asset created on Ethereum, we're not talking about wallets here, we're talking about crypto collectibles using ERC-721 contracts. Every digital asset can be, that item ID can be represented by a QR code. Now, what you could actually have is you could have one of these ERC-721 contracts written by the manufacturers and hooked up to their printing machine, such that every time a product is produced, a new collectible, crypto collectible, is written to the blockchain in accordance that matches that particular item. So the QR code is printed as a label onto the shirt somewhere at the exact same time. So the machine prints the QR code. The application running the printing machine has produced a crypto collectible. It runs through. Oh, I keep hitting this. It runs through a machine, just checks the QR code to ensure its validity, to ensure that transaction has been written to the blockchain. Say we're using Ethereum. And when the customer goes to buy that shirt wherever they are, the brand, as part of a campaign, would say that we're bringing trusted, verifiable means of validating that the good you're buying is authentic. Download this free app, which is a wallet, to check that you have bought the authentic shirt. They download the wallet, they scan the QR code, pops into their wallet, or they can see it on the blockchain. That exact shirt that has been produced from their factory as a crypto collectible. And the computer that actually printed this has made a little 3D rendered image of the exact shirt, the exact color, the time it was printed, and a small number or a small code that also validates with the label. So they get their own little crypto collectible that matches the shirt, and that is one way you could do it. And that could apply to any product.
And whilst you were talking, I was about to say, well, what would stop them printing? What would stop a counterfeiter printing or copying that QR code and putting it on the next shirt? And then I just answered my own question in my own head, and like, well, that's a double spend rule. That's the power of the blockchain, because
Correct.
let's say so I make this cup and I say this is a one of a kind cup, and then China, but a nation takes this cup and goes, oh, I'll make a fake one of these, so I'll just copy that QR code. Well, no, because once I've sold that cup, the real cup, and then the counterfeit cup with the counterfeit QR code that's copied off that last code, they take the application and they scan, oh, this looks like a genuine heat activated cup, and they go blip. No, the application would say, no, we already sold this cup with that QR code.
Yes. And this is how you would do it. I just had another idea, because what if someone compromised the supply chain and scanned the QR codes on the shirt and then just printed them on other shirts? So you would still have the same effect. You could download the app, you could scan the code, it would bring up the digital asset. Here's what you would do to combat that problem. Well, this would help, is when the customer scans, so the digital asset, the digital shirt or cup, would be created on the blockchain. It would be automatically deposited into the company's wallet.
Yep.
When the customer buys the item, they download the app, they scan the item, they can see that the item is still sitting in the company's wallet, it has not been transferred. They verify that they've bought the shirt through either the receipt that is printed out at the store, say that they've bought it. That initiates a smart contract, which transfers the digital asset out of the company's wallet into their wallet. And once they've done that, there is now a record of a transfer, one transfer only, from company's wallet to the customer's wallet. So if that logo then gets copied by any other person to try and counterfeit, anyone just gets, the person would scan it and see that the item's already been transferred into another wallet. It's a one-time use.
The shirt becomes a Satoshi.
And you would also create a secondary market for people buying really rare shirts or garments or cups or whatever, because they have the digital collectible as well as the real collectible.
And if you want to say this pen was owned by Elton John, I don't know why, because his movie's out recently, Rocket Man, well, you could prove it. You could actually say, yeah, he did own it, because the blockchain shows that this pen was sold to Elton John at this time.
And it was in his wallet, which has been verified as Elton John's wallet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that would apply for everything. So we could keep the genuineness of every item, the ownership record. Because at the moment, if you watch that show, what is it? Porn Stars?
I used to love that show, man. I used to love that show.
Yeah, Porn Stars. So it's authenticity. How do you prove it's authentic? Well, papers. But of course, papers can be copied and trick themselves, but the blockchain cannot. So imagine a blockchain now. And I guess the main distinction to make between the difference between a barcode and a QR code is that a barcode is the same code for a whole array of items, like 10 million jars, 10 million tins of baby formula. Whereas a QR code, each code is applicable to that specific
It's
tin.
Unique.
Yep.
One-time use.
It'll save lives.
Yeah, well, there you go, guys. We've essentially just nutted out a feasible concept for using digital assets on a public blockchain to provide a verifiable source of logistics and materials handling.
And I did it in my pajamas whilst you were drinking beer. Imagine what I could do in a suit.
No. You're relaxed. That's where the creative part of the brain starts to crack.
Well, actually, yeah, they talk about some of the biggest deals and biggest plans made on a serviette in a bar, and that's where you have exactly what you said. You're relaxed. You don't have this pressure,
Absolutely.
and you're like, hey, you're shooting the shit, and it's like, what if we do it this way? And I've actually seen in my lifetime really high-ranking and powerful people, both civilian and military, come in with a serviette. They won't do it in front of a board, but they're like, I came up with this idea, and they pull out a napkin or a serviette. And of course, they transcribe it into a more powerful document. But yeah, some of the greatest ideas are done in relaxed states.
Bloody oath. Mate, take us into the next article. What do you got for us?
Okay, well, same as you. I don't want to read it too much, but I actually want to give a shout out to Naomi Brockwell, our Australian crypto sister. She's been following quite closely the highlights from the Facebook Libra Senate hearing in the United States. So Facebook has made Libra. Libra is the project that everyone's talking about. And the American government has basically put Libra on the stand, if you will. They basically grilled them over a Senate hearing to say, prove why we should trust you and why shouldn't we stop you. And our crypto sister Naomi has made a couple of really good videos where she's actually got a cartoon 3D image of her face, and it's very good. It's very entertaining, but that's not the part that's so powerful about it. Naomi has given us a really good breakdown, a really good summary of some of the questions that they're putting to the senators, to the Facebook guy. So the Facebook team, and it's not just Facebook themselves. They of course have a cartel. Some have argued a cartel of all these different organizations, these different companies, including MasterCard, Uber, PayPal, Visa, and so forth. And they've got one guy as their front man who's gone to answer these questions at this Senate hearing. And he is awesome. If you're looking at the image of him now, this guy is cool as ice, mega intelligent, and has all the answers to the really dumb questions. Now, what I mean by dumb questions, Bo, is they say there's no such thing as a stupid question. And we say that so we encourage questions to be asked. And I get that. And certainly when I'm in charge, I try to adopt that because you want to make sure that people are asking questions. However, when you're at a Senate hearing and you're a senator and you're asking questions on behalf of, a country to a organization that is bigger than a country, that is Facebook, 2.5 billion people, bigger than certainly their customer base, bigger than countries combined, you kind of want to have some idea what you're talking about. And Naomi has surmised some of these, and I'll leave a link to her videos below because they're really good. But Naomi has come back and commentated on the responses of the Facebook representative to the senators. And she said something that I've been thinking about for days, and I nearly made a video on myself, but I want to talk to you about it, Bo, is that the questions were so bad and the approach by the Senate was so horrific that I started to defend Facebook. So they're so arrogant, aggressive, unbalanced, biased, and dare I say wrong, that before I knew it, I'm like, I'm defending Facebook to the responses from the senators. Now, some of to the questions from the senators, but one in particular, Bo, was that of privacy. So a big theme that the Senate is putting to Facebook is saying, well, you're going to have all their data. And in the past, we haven't been able to trust you with the data because we see that, you've done pretty dodgy things with the data. Why should we trust you with people's financial data? And then I went through thought experiments and I'm like, well, first of all, why do we trust banks with our data? It got me thinking, who knows more about me than anyone? Well, of course, I've got my employer. When I was certainly working for the Australian Defence Force, they pretty much know everything about me, certainly for security clearances. But that aside, as just an everyday Australian who's going about commerce, no one knows more about me than my bank. My bank knows where I live, what my marital status is, how much I earn, how much debt I've got, how much I don't earn, how long I've been with this employer, how old I am. They know everything about me. And yet here we are when we get another organization, Facebook. Now, I'm not supporting Facebook, so don't get me wrong. But why is it that we say, well, we're quite happy for banks who, create recessions, print money out of thin air, launder money for terrorist organisations, as we've seen before with the Commonwealth Bank of Australia and other banks, unknowingly or knowingly, who knows, but there's articles out there, read it from ABC News, where they have laundered money for terrorist organisations. Now, we're quite happy with that organisation having all the KYC, know your customer data, and everything about them. But then when we have another company getting people's data, it's like, well, that's unacceptable because you could misuse it. And I'm really thinking, when it comes to freedom, so I'll go to The Godfather now. Andreas Antonopoulos, in many of his talks, he talks about freedom. And freedom of speech is also the freedom of association and the freedom of privacy. So if you consider freedom on a spectrum, the least amount of freedom you can have with respect to privacy is when you're probably in jail. I've never been to jail, but if you look at people in jail or speak to people who have been in jail or watch documentaries on people who have been in jail, privacy is denied. You are going to the bathroom, to the shower, you are sleeping, you are eating, you are doing everything right next to someone else. And that's part of your punishment of all your privacy is stripped from you. So that's right at one end of the spectrum of having your freedom taken away from you. Then if you go to the other end of the spectrum of freedom and privacy, look at a really rich person. They live in a gated community or in a gated building or house or property with security guards and complete privacy. So when it comes to the spectrum of privacy and freedom, if we look at it at one end, you have no privacy, no freedom. At the other end, lots of freedom and lots of privacy. So my question is, and my thought on this, Bo, is why is it that some companies we attack when it comes to privacy? Now, there are lots of areas to the Facebook project. I get that. There's lots and lots of things. And I, again, watch Naomi's videos because she goes into it quite well. But just on the point of privacy, why do we trust central non-elected banks who have been known to launder money for terrorists, fact, and who have been known to print money into the point of recession and global financial crises, fact, who have been misusing funds or mismanaging people's lives to the point that a royal commission is required, fact. Why is there no issue when it comes to those people having data? Yet when we have other organizations having data, it's like, wow, you're getting people's data. And just to close off on this rant here, what was really powerful about it was that one of the questions was like, well, you're dealing with people's money and you demand their data. And this guy came back and said, that's your law, America. The government said, if you're dealing with money, you've got to get KYC. And here we had these senators saying, how dare you get these people's data when you're dealing with their money? And this Facebook guy is like, hang on a second. Not in so many words, not verbatim, but he's basically said, your law says when dealing with money, get the people's data. Now that we're complying to your law, you've got a problem with it. Which one is it?
Well, the difference is banks are heavily regulated. So in Australia, we have the Banking Act of 1970 something. Banks have been regulated for nearly 100 years. So we have decades and decades and decades and decades of refined regulation that banks have to comply with. Tech companies do not. They have nothing, virtually nothing, which is why governments are playing catch up. And it's also why you're hearing stupid questions from very powerful people. It's because they don't understand it. It's because most people don't understand it. And this is why it's dangerous, is these tech companies have been allowed to dictate their own futures because they've been unstoppable. There's been nothing to stop them.
And they're cross-border as well. Because how does America regulate the operations in Switzerland?
Well, there's probably ways they could do that, but
That's why you have Swiss bank accounts, man.
yeah, but America does still have the Department of Justice and other financial firms would still have some jurisdiction with the Swiss. If perhaps, say, someone was under investigation for money laundering or something in the United States that's moved money offshore, there would be something that they would have up their sleeve. However, getting back to the tech companies, the reason is they, and not to say banks don't have a bad reputation, they do, of course, but the tech companies are known for collating huge amounts of data very subversively, and this is where they're in trouble. So they have these data centers scattered around the world, right? Now, you did raise an interesting point that the banks do have a lot of information on you in terms of your transactions. They know your transactions, they know where you spend money. They could run algorithms and get a pretty good understanding about what you do in your day-to-day life. But this pales in comparison to what the tech companies know about you, to say what Facebook knows about you. Every single like, every single picture you click on, every single page you follow, your friends, what they do, is all put into algorithms to understand you better, which is why you get targeted ads, which is why you talk about something and the next day you get an ad for you. Why? Because your mic was on. Little did you know that your mic was a hot mic. It was on. It was listening to you, and it listened to what you were talking about, and then it pitched an ad to you. Now, the banks may be selling your data to third-party providers. I couldn't say that for sure, but one thing that's caught the tech companies, which is what has gotten them in trouble, is they have subversively tracked and stored your data, run statistical algorithms on it to know everything about your personality. So if we even get into psychology, right, there are general personality traits that most people fit into. You know, you have rare ones and you have common ones. You know enough about a person, you've set up some algorithms, mapped personality traits, you can understand a lot about someone. I mean, a lot. Predictive personalities, you can understand what they do if triggered by. Do some research and you'll find that Facebook ran an experiment a few years ago where they manipulated news feeds to show a lot of negative stories over a few hour period to see how people would react. Right, and they were I can't remember what the stories were, but they're running these really negative stories. They essentially manipulated the news feed to run negative stories that people were seeing, and a lot of people got really emotional, upset about it. It's essentially the event is exactly what they had predicted happening. Now, what these tech companies are doing is the regulators are scared because they don't know what they're doing. There's no regulations. They themselves don't understand it. This industry has moved so quick. Technology has moved so quick. Where again, the banks, and not that they care about the regulations, have obviously broke them a number of times and probably still continue to. But there's 100 years of regulations, acts, and requirements for them, legal requirements for them to adhere to. Whereas these other companies, they don't exist. We're playing catch up.
So here's a thought for you. So on one end, capitalism is freedom, and again, we're just doing thought experiments here, viewers. So capitalism is the free market decides. Now, I'm not a fan of Facebook. I have got it, but I have basically put so many guards on it and taken so much out of it, and I haven't contributed to it, as in I don't put photos on there. I don't use the messenger anymore unless I have to for my baseball team, and that's a pain in the ass because my whole baseball team uses it, and it's how we communicate, and that's really the only way I'm forced to use Facebook at the moment, through Messenger. But ultimately, all of that data that they can collect, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, they can't collect it if I don't use it. So if I don't use Facebook, they can't collect that data. So on one hand, I have a right to not use Facebook or to use Facebook. And on arguably the same hand, Facebook has a right in the capitalistic free society of democracy to create a product that people can choose or not choose to use. So it's not mandated that we use Facebook. So I agree. The abuse of data is a law that should be created in itself, because again, in this hearing, they're talking about signing up to the terms and conditions. Now, the terms and conditions, that I think could be subjected to law. So if there's something in the terms and conditions that says we have the right to sell or hand on your data, that could be something that the Senate could attack specifically there. But then I also thought about the fact that, so you have cartels, right, where in economic terms, lots of companies work together and they create a monopolistic or duopolistic or oligopolistic market or conditions where they work together in conjunction, where they all basically have massive market share and can manipulate the market so everyone conforms to their own ways. So on one hand, Facebook is saying, hey, we're not centralizing the data and we're not all powerful, because look, we have, I didn't use this word, but it is, we have a cartel. We have 20 companies where anyone can jump in, and not anyone can jump in. There's a lot of rules to jump in. You need, I think, an annual turnover of $1 billion. You have to pay 10 million to get in, and there's lots of conditions to get in onto this Libra project. So it's not, in fact, open to, like, you and I can't say, hey, yeah, I'll get into Libra. You can only be the customer. You can't be one of these members of the cartel. And so on one hand, it's like Facebook's really smart because they're saying to the government, hey, look, we've broken ourselves into all these different companies, so we're not one centralized power. But on the other hand, it's like, oh, hang on a second. We know that Facebook bans people from using their platform that they don't like. If they're too left or too right, they ban their freedom of speech. But they can kind of do that because it's their product, their terms and conditions. But we've also seen PayPal do the same thing. If I wanted to if I want to donate money to a certain social website or commentary site that has a certain political opinion, and PayPal doesn't agree with that, then they can cut the money. They can stop the money going through.
I'll just quickly interject for 1 second regarding uh, Facebook being a private entity, whatever. There's a misconception. I know you didn't specifically say this, but Facebook is actually a public entity. Its shares are traded on public stock markets. But second of all, Facebook is in hot water at the moment because them as an entity, their legal structure is they identify not as a publisher, right? So they are not publishing the content, but as a public message board. So these are two different entities. A public message board means you simply allow people to have free speech. You provide some safeguards and measures, but you don't change the narrative or dictate what people do or what people
Like
say.
a telephone company, like a telephone provider.
Correct. But the moment you start curating stories to fit a narrative, and one perfect example of that is the political censorship, is you start becoming a publisher because you are curating the content that people see. And the moment you become a publisher, everything changes. You, the company, are held liable for content that breaks the law. Now, this is the same as YouTube as well. They claim that they are a public message board. They are not a publisher. Therefore, it's the content creator is held liable for content that breaks the law. But in fact, they are a publisher because they are or have been caught to be curating content to fit a message. Therefore, it is the company that ends up or will or should be held liable for malicious content that breaks the law.
Yeah, this is that. I'm glad you bring up that example there because as I said, I align that to, and there has been discussions, a telephone company. So you're Telstra in Australia, and you provide Telstra lines. You've provided the ability for me to pick up the phone and talk to you, and you and I can talk to each other on the phone. Now, if you and I are baddies and we say we're going to commit a bad act in New York, and we use a telephone line to have that conversation to coordinate that attack, Telecom or Telstra isn't held liable for providing that platform.
No,
They don't
because
even, no one would ever think it.
that's right, because they are merely the communications medium. They are facilitating the communication. They're not responsible for the communication.
So is someone like, I say, I don't know, BitChute, where are they different in the sense if they're not facilitating the conversation, can they just publish anything? And this goes back, I guess, to links even to the New Zealand shooting. So after the New Zealand shooting, they're like the Christchurch shooting, they're like, well, you can never allow this streaming to take place. And in theory, that's great. You don't want to have a platform where you can stream the shooting of innocent people. That's horrible. But at the same token, it's like, well, just apply that model to the phone model. How do we say to the telephone companies, right, you have to make sure that no one has bad conversations on the phone. So you have to listen into everyone's phone conversations and put a 10-second delay on those telephone conversations and absorb the cost somehow of filtering all of those telephone conversations. So if Bo and Adam talk about robbing a bank, the telephone company can't be held liable.
Yeah, it starts getting very complicated, and we're getting into probably some pretty heavy legal stuff in these realms. But it is interesting and shows how nuanced.
But anyway, to close off with this Facebook one, the thing that does scare me, Bo, is that, again, I don't support this project, but I don't think it can be stopped. And the reason why I don't think it can be stopped entirely is for several reasons. One, Facebook is richer and smarter than governments. They have more money than most governments, more technically advanced people than most governments, more access to more qualified lawyers than most governments. They have more flexibility than most governments. So the government makes a law and they can just change the model to say, that's how we do taxes and it's how we build corporations to, well, this is the rule book. We'll play to the rules, but we'll play around the rules, and it's not necessarily breaking the law. And they not only that, they have more reach over the world. So if America, as I mentioned before, God bless America, but they can't tell all countries what to do. And of course, yes, Facebook, I remember in one of your videos, yes, it is registered in the United States, therefore under United States law. But global companies can move, and they do move, and they have moved, and they've moved to wherever they want to. As an example, Nike making shoes in the cheapest country, or anyone making shoes in the cheapest country. So as a model stands, I don't think they'll survive, but I can't see how it can be stopped, noting all the facets, the power, the flexibility of these huge companies, the money, the political reach, the global economy that they can work in, the blockchain, the power, all the options available to them. What scares me the most, though, is that we do in fact have this cartel. We have a cartel where you and I are a customer and we say, I don't like Facebook, as an example. And then Facebook goes, right, we'll show you, Adam and Bo. So suddenly we can no longer use PayPal, Coinbase, MasterCard, Visa, Uber, and any business, any global business that just blacklists Adam and Bo because we said something bad about it. That's the bit that really, really concerns me.
Well, I'm optimistic because I think in the near future we're going to see something like a digital bill of rights that's going to be drafted to protect users online. We'll just have to wait and see. But in regards to Facebook, Libra, I stand firm that this project is not going ahead. I think there is too many red flags around it now. There is too much heat on them, and I think the US government knows more than what I do about the company, about their practices, things they've done, and I think it is a huge risk on their part to proceed with this given the current climate. But time will tell, my friend.
My crypto brother, I hope you are right. I really do. And this one, I really do hope I'm very wrong. But as you said, time will tell. Let's go on to our coin picks.
All right, my friends. All right, let me just pull this up. We better wrap this one up quick because we're over an hour now. We're nearly up to an hour and 7 minutes.
Oh,
God bless the people still listening to us ramble, hey?
We're okay. Hey? If we took away Top Gun, we'll be okay.
Look, it was interesting.
Totally worth it. Totally worth it.
All right, man. What's your pick? What do you got?
Geez, tough week ahead, man. Bitcoin's taking a kick in the guts, an absolute kick in the guts. I'm not feeling too bullish over the next week, although I have heard some really good talk about some of the altcoins. Holo, you know what my pick's going to be? Pundi X.
Pundi?
Go down to 47.
What's your rationale for that?
It's just a lot of talk in the crypto space about it, and it's undervalued. So Pundi X, look at it. It's $0.0006 of a dollar. It's nothing.
That's cheap. It's cheap. There's only 234 billion circulating supply.
And if you get out there and start looking at what's happening in the Pundi X community, and noting it is in the green for the week gone at 0.96% over the last 7 days, I think that's my coin pick, Pundi X.
You're bullish. All right. Let's have a look for me. I've got nothing in my head that I've thought about before this. So I'm just going to have a quick scan. I'm going to have a quick look. I'm going to see. Look, crypto.com is just absolutely ripping.
What's the code?
The code is CRO.
I've never seen a crypto coin that's named a website.
Yeah, it's interesting, but kind of smart branding at the same time because just you see crypto.com everywhere and you go, oh, I'll go to crypto.com, and then you go there and you're like, oh, it's actually a pretty nice website.
Yeah.
Great team though, really good bunch of people there, sponsoring and helping out a lot of crypto content creators and influencers actually, which has been very welcomed.
Well, I won't say too much until they start paying me. Crypto.com. Book it up.
All right, look, I'm going to go Lisk. Followers of my channel, I know, they know I've been a big fan of Lisk. I've got big bags of Lisk. I have for a long time. These guys have been steady in the background, building out their product, not listening to the markets, not worried about prices, just work. And, this may sound crazy to people because of how long this project has been developing their protocol for, probably like 3, maybe 4 years. But these things take a long time, and I would rather the project take their time and do things right, especially with such an ambitious project, than rush it and get it wrong. So you got,
Hey, you know, The Godfather was talking about Lisk the other day.
was he really?
Yeah, The Godfather spoke specifically about Ethereum because they he was in an interview and they said, why are you promoting Ethereum? And it wasn't. He said it was very good. He said it's not that I'm promoting Ethereum; it's that I'm promoting the type of blockchains that Ethereum create, and those blockchains is this, like a build your own blockchain or the ability to create stuff. He specifically mentioned Ethereum, EOS, and Lisk.
Well, there you go. I've been saying for a long time that if there's going to be one protocol that will dethrone Ethereum, it will be Lisk, and that's because they have built the entire protocol using JavaScript. So the developer tools and the code is all in the JavaScript programming language, which is what modern web developers use to write web applications. So they've also built libraries of different functions. So when this is fully deployed, there'll be a software development kit. Those familiar with using TypeScript or JavaScript can grab the code library. They can deploy a blockchain. They can deploy a side chain. They can set up their own consensus mechanisms for the side chain. It's going to be simple, easy, beautiful user interface. I believe it's going to be the best developer user experience, hand down, of any blockchain in the entire world when this is finished. And again, coming back to you tapping into a market share of millions of developers out there right now that are familiar with using JavaScript. Guess what? There may be 5,000, 10,000 that can use Solidity, which is what Ethereum is written in. So, and Lisk, their branding is extremely strong. I just think it's going to be a very exciting project when it launches, and I don't think it's too far away, maybe 3 to 6 months. So that's going to be my pick for the week.
Your Lisk is my Sky. So
yeah, right.
Everything you just described is my. Hey, check this out, man. So Lisk comparative to Bitcoin over the last 7 days or 24 hours. 24 hours is up 10.85%.
Yeah,
So and if you look at Sky is comparative to Bitcoin, also up
true.
10%. Wow,
Bit of an altcoin pump going on at the moment, I think.
What are the odds of that? Are two coins that we like that on the same have the same rise out of 3,000 coins?
Well, look, mate, I think that's a good segue to wrap this up. We're at 1 hour, 12 minutes, guys. Thank you for watching. If you're watching on my channel or Adam's channel, please be sure to subscribe. We really appreciate your support. If you like the content, don't forget to leave a like. We always really, really appreciate the likes. Yeah, another good video, mate. Thanks for having a chat with me, and over to you.
Yeah, brother. We should probably tell the viewers at the beginning. Remember, if you want to get more time in your day whilst watching cryptocurrency videos such as ours, watch these videos at 1.25 speed or 1.5 speed, and you can get all the content compressed into a smaller space. But perhaps save that for next week. Thanks for listening. Happy investing, and we'll talk to you next time.
See you guys. If you enjoyed the video today, then please consider leaving a like. And if you haven't subscribed yet, then come on board and also click the notification icon so you're always kept up to date. Leave a comment and tell me your thoughts on today's content. Then check out this next interesting video picked just for you.